The morning light filtered through the thin curtain, painting soft gold across to Sam's tired face. She had barely slept. For days, her body had felt strange nausea, dizziness, an unexplainable tenderness in her chest. At first, she thought it was just exhaustion from work and the endless worries that shadowed her nights. But when she stood before the mirror that morning, pale and trembling, a quiet fear began to take shape in her heart. By noon, she found herself sitting in a small clinic on the corner of the old street. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and rain. Outside, the sky was heavy, as if sharing her unease. When the doctor finally looked up from the report, his tone was gentle, but the words hit her like thunder. "Congratulations," he said softly. "You're about 6 weeks pregnant." Sam froze. Her fingers clutched the edge of the chair. Pregnant. Her heart raced wildly, echoing through her whole body. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Images flashed in her mind: Ly's smile, his touch, the warmth of the nights they spent together before everything between them fell silent. She walked out of the clinic into the rain, her umbrella forgotten. Each drop felt like a whisper of doubt falling against her skin. She pressed her palm against her abdomen, whispering through trembling lips, "Is it you, Ly? Is this your child, or just the cruel trick of fate?" The wind answered with silence, and somewhere deep inside, Sam realized her life had just changed forever. That night, Sam sat alone by the window, the rain still tapping gently against the glass. Her small apartment was quiet to quiet. The hum of the city below only made her loneliness heavier. On the table lay the clinic's report, half soaked from her trembling hands. She stared at it for hours, as if the words might suddenly change and tell her it was all just a mistake. But it wasn't. The truth was there, printed in cold black ink. She was pregnant. Her thoughts drifted to Ly, his voice, his laughter, the way he used to brush a strand of hair from her face. For a brief time, he made her believe in love, against something she thought had died long ago, when life turned her into a single mother, struggling to survive. But things between them had grown complicated, tangled between work, pride, and the shadows of their different worlds. Now, how could she tell him this? Would he think she was trying to trap him? Would he believe her? Or worse, would he turn away? Sam closed her eyes, holding her stomach. A tear rolled down her cheek, warm and bitter. She wasn't sure what scared her more: the thought of raising another child alone, or the possibility that Ly might reject her. "Maybe it's better, he never knows," she whispered into the night. At that moment, she decided to keep her secret. She would protect this tiny life, no matter how hard it became. She didn't need sympathy or pity. She just needed strength. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. Sam hugged herself tighter, her heart breaking quietly between the sound of the rain and the memory of Ly's last goodbye. Days turned into weeks, and Sam's secret grew quietly within her. She worked harder than ever, trying to hide her pale face and the exhaustion that often washed over her. Every morning, she told herself she was fine. But when night came, loneliness crept in like a cold wind. Meanwhile, Ly couldn't stop thinking about her. Since their last argument, Sam had grown distant, her messages shorter, her smile forced. He told himself to give her space, yet something inside him ached every time he saw her eyes filled with sadness. One evening, Ly arrived unexpectedly at her small apartment. The lights were dim, and through the half-open door, he saw Sam sitting on the floor, surrounded by papers and baby clothes she had sewn herself. For a long moment, he just stood there, frozen. "Sam," he whispered. She turned sharply, eyes wide with shock. The color drained from her face. "Ly, what are you doing here?" "I came because I was worried. You haven't been yourself lately," he said softly, stepping closer. His gaze drifted to the little bundle of white fabric beside her, a tiny shirt, carefully folded, with delicate stitches of love. Ly's heart stopped. "Sam, are you?" She interrupted, shaking her head. "Please, don't ask." Her voice broke, trembling like her hands. "This isn't your responsibility." He knelt beside her, his expression unreadable, a storm of confusion and concern in his eyes. "Tell me the truth. Is it mine?" Tears welled up in Sam's eyes. She couldn't lie, but she couldn't bear to see pity in his either. Her silence was enough of an answer. Ly sat back slowly, his breath unsteady. The truth hit him harder than he imagined. All the walls he had built around his heart started to crumble. "Why didn't you tell me?" he whispered.
"Because you already have a world I don't belong to," she said, voice trembling, "and I didn't want to lose my dignity trying to fit into it." The room fell silent. Outside, the city lights flickered like distant stars to souls sitting in the half-dark, torn between love, pride, and fate. Ly sat in silence, his thoughts tangled like a storm. To Sam's words echoed in his head. "You already have a world I don't belong to." He realized then how deeply she had been hurting, hiding her pain behind quiet smiles, carrying the weight of everything alone.
Without a word, Ly reached out and took her trembling hands into his. They were cold, fragile, and calloused from long days of work. "Sam," he said, his voice low but steady, "you don't have to fight alone anymore." Sam shook her head. "No, Ly, don't say that. You don't understand. Your family, your company, your reputation, everything you've built, people will talk. They'll judge you for being with someone like me." "I don't care what they say," his tone firmed, eyes burning with conviction. "Let them talk, let them judge. None of it matters if I lose you." Her tears spilled over, one by one, tracing soft lines down her cheeks. Ly wiped them gently with his thumb, his heart aching at how much she had endured in silence. "Do you know," he whispered, "that I've missed you every single day. I looked for you, Sam. I wanted to tell you that my world doesn't mean anything if you're not in it." She wanted to believe him God. She wanted to, but fear clung to her chest. What if love isn't enough, Ly? What if this child grows up being judged? What if you regret it? He leaned forward, his forehead resting gently against hers. "Then I'll protect both of you. Every day, every storm, every whisper behind our backs, I'll face it all if it means I can keep you safe." Sam's breath caught in her throat, the sincerity in his voice, the warmth in his touch. It melted the last bit of resistance she had. Her tears fell freely now, but they weren't from sadness. For the first time in months, she let herself lean into him, feeling his arms wrap around her with quiet strength. Outside, the wind howled through the night, but inside that small room, there was warmth, a promise, fragile but real. Ly closed his eyes and whispered, "This time, I won't let you go again." And Sam, though still uncertain of the future, felt something shift inside her, a spark of hope, faint but alive. Days turned into weeks, and the truth could no longer be hidden. Word about to Sam's pregnancy spread quickly through whispers in the office hallways, through curious glances from neighbors, and even through Ly's own family. The tension was thick the morning Ly called a meeting at his company. Everyone gathered in the glass conference room, unsure of what was about to happen. Sam stood quietly outside the door, her heart pounding like a drum. Then Ly spoke, his voice firm and unwavering. "I have something to announce," he began, his eyes scanning the faces of his employees, the same people who had whispered behind his back for days. "Sam is carrying my child." The room went silent. A few gasps were heard, but Ly continued before anyone could speak. "She is the woman I love, and I take full responsibility. Not out of duty, but because I choose her. I choose this family we're about to have." Through the glass wall, Sam's eyes welled up with tears. She could hardly breathe. Never in her life had someone spoken for her with such strength, such clarity.
Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Ly brought her to the small garden behind his home, the place where they had once planted flowers together. He knelt down, not with a ring in his hand, but with something far deeper, a quiet, genuine vow. "Sam," he said softly, "I know the road ahead won't be easy. People may doubt us, judge us, but I promise you will never walk it alone. I'll protect you and our child, every step of the way.
Sam's tears fell freely as she reached out to hold his hand. The cold wind brushed against her face, but in that moment, she didn't feel the chill, only warmth. The kind of warmth that came from love that had been tested and had endured. She whispered, her voice trembling, "Lee, I believe you." He smiled, gently placing a hand over her belly. "Then let's begin again, not as what the world expects us to be, but as who we truly are." And as the night sky opened above them, filled with soft starlight, Sam leaned into his embrace, no longer afraid, no longer running. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, it felt beautifully alive. Their love, once fragile and forbidden, had finally found its home, in truth, in courage, and in the promise of new life. Love is not only about passion or fleeting moments of tenderness, it is about courage. The courage to stand beside someone when the world looks away, to protect a fragile bond when storms threaten to tear it apart. Sam's story is one of quiet strength, a woman who carried the weight of the world on her shoulders, who feared judgment, and who doubted her worth. Yet, through her journey, she discovered that love cannot be measured by wealth, status, or the past. It is measured by how deeply one is willing to stay when things fall apart.
When Sam found out she was pregnant, she didn't see it as a blessing at first. She saw it as chaos, a storm she wasn't ready to face. But the truth of her heart, and Lee's courage to speak it, transformed that fear into hope. His decision to claim her, not as an obligation but as a choice, showed that love built on honesty will always outlast gossip, doubt, and circumstance.
This story reminds us that real love is not perfect. It is brave. It demands sacrifice, patience, and faith in the unseen. Sometimes, love means facing the world's cruelty with a quiet smile, holding on to the hand that once saved you, and believing that together you can build something beautiful out of broken pieces.
For Lee and Sam, the child became more than a life. It became a symbol of renewal. It reminded them that no matter how dark the night gets, dawn will always return for those who choose truth over fear. So, if you ever find yourself doubting love, remember Sam, the woman who thought she was too poor to be loved, and Lee, the man who proved that love, when it is true, knows no boundaries. Because sometimes, the most beautiful stories are not written in grand mansions or under chandeliers, but in simple hearts that dare to believe, even when the world tells them not to.